Our first speaker is Philippe Pasquier. He's a scientist artist working at the edge of generative systems, computational creativity, and human AI co-creation. He's a professor at Simon Fraser University's School of Interactive Arts and Technology in Vancouver, where he directs the Metacreation Lab for creative AI. And he'll be talking about AI literacy beyond polarization, the case of small data and model crafting with Autolume.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation this morning. I'm really happy to be with you. So yeah, in the next 50 minutes, I wanted to make a case for a peculiar type of teaching because, of course, we're going to teach geeky and enthusiastic students all of the Comfy UI technique, if not PyTorch. But there's other type of learners that we need to address, I believe, in this particular time. And I was sort of triggered a few years ago when giving talks about generative AI in art festivals and or art schools. I had literally people showing up to protest the talk and to say that if their dean would spend their tuition money into paying someone like me, that would be really a pity. And so that got us to react, and I'll explain a little bit that. But first, I'll lay down the ground. So of course, there's been a rise of and a move from AI for recognition and recommendation. Think about the search engine and Netflix telling you what to watch next and Spotify what to listen to next into an AI that is more generative, indeed. And there's been in particular a rise of commercially driven product around the notion of prompting and sort of the appearance of the text box as a vortex for all of creativity. So what I like to do when I teach is to teach the history of automation and put things into a way larger context. I think the previous session was talking about the fact that that things will change and are changing really quickly, and it's hard to make art with a tool that is changing every 3 months, because if the violin will change every 3 months, nobody will know how to play it. And so I put that into the context of generative art, this idea of delegating, having artists delegating decisions to a system. And I put that in the context of automation, whereby each time there's a wave of automation, be it the industrialization or the replacement of musicians in cinemas and theaters, there's reactions and pushback. And so with the rise of this new wave of tools, there's been this rise of prompting, and then this sort of onslaught of content generated. You see an example here on the right using the Microsoft 360 Copilot that was literally imposed on us here at SFU on the unceded territory of the coast capital of the Coast Salish people on the west coast of Canada, where I'm talking to you from. The university decided to go with this tool, and then you get this hyper-saturated, optimistic, GPU-tanned content that is flourishing everywhere. Of course, prompting itself is not even new, and back in 2012, and you can still try it online, we were already developing prompt-based interfaces for computer-assisted creativity, and this idea that by curating content, describing that content, being the curator and going back and forth with the generator, you can eventually navigate to the content you want to make. And then we study that idea. Is it true that, you know, those generative systems will make professionals and beginners work faster and better? And we find indeed, when we study, for example, for sound design, this computer-assisted sound design system where you describe a scene, the emotions associated with it, and you get a full Pro Tools mix that you can download into your DAW and edit with various sounds classified in background and foreground. If you don't like it, you generate it again. You can change your request. You can, of course, edit the results. And it just sort of seems to alleviate the bottleneck of having to find all those sounds and to cut them and edit them, which is really the time-consuming part of sound design when there's millions, if not billions of sounds in those databases that you can access. And we do show, in fact, that both for beginners and for professionals, it does make people work faster on average, and then the outcome is better. And here both subjectively felt as being better, but also objectively because we get those students to make an assignment without the AI, and with the AI, we can see that they're better with the AI. But, and that's an important but, we find in all of the experiments, this is just one example here, that we conducted, that the notion of authorship is being diluted at best. Often there's actually a recognition that there's no authorship. This is great content, but this is not my image, this is not my music, this is not my content. AI made it. And I made it maybe, but very indirectly. And so that's a bit of a problem. And that's a problem that really weighs the questions around prompting and the notion of authorship and ownership. In fact, in legally speaking, in Canada and in the USA and most legal systems, prompting doesn't give you authorship of what comes out, which is a problem when we try to teach people how to create or design. And also with prompting, there's this last mile problem where you feel that you're generating quickly something potentially, but you don't really get exactly to what you want. You get close enough, but you usually don't get exactly there. But the main issue, I think, that is being pointed by the media at the moment is the big data issue, that in order to do prompting, you need to have big models trained on big data and possibly using copyrighted content through scrapping the internet. And of course, there's a real pushback, legal and otherwise, reputational, from various creative communities and the stakeholders, and this is ongoing everywhere, really. And then there is the rise of synthetic media. Last year for text, we passed the moment where there's more synthetic media poured online than human-made content. And there's a pushback against that as well, because there's definitely a lot of AI slop being poured in every possible domain, and a lot of money being invested, so that now we're being told that this type of AI is going to either replace a lot of people, and we're in doo-doo, or we invested so much money in it that we're in a bubble and we're in doo-doo. And so therefore, I understand and empathize in a way with the students that are coming to protest me when I come and talk to the university or high school or film festival. Is a big part of society that is really very unhappy. And therefore, there's really a polarization right now around AI, with a self-selection bias that the student will typically get into a more rich AI courses at universities are self-selecting to join us, but there's a lot of people who are carefully avoiding us. And so I've been in the last few months, also because I gave a number of talks in the USA, and so pouring the word diversity as much as I can into my talks was sort of a mission of mine, but I've been talking a lot about AI diversity in the last few months, and I think we need to teach it a little bit more, because people are really overwhelmingly hearing the dominant discourse, which is pushed really literally by corporate infrastructures and for-profit companies who have invested so much in those prompt-based systems. But the truth is we need to teach that there's a diversity of types of AI, that things didn't start with big data and won't end with them either, that there's a diversity of socio-ethical setting, and we don't have to use commercial products. There's a lot of open source, although probably not enough and not accessible enough. And we've been working in Canada with MUTEC, Society of Art and Technology, and art centers around the notion of AI commons. And I think we need to coordinate and work more on these together to have alternatives to those corporate offerings, and a variety of use and tasks and ways to use AI, and explain to people that we're moving in a world where it's not going to be no AI versus 100% AI generated content, although they make the charts in the US right now. But it's going to be a case of how much AI do you want to use, right? Maybe you use it only for correcting the grammar, maybe you use it for ideation, etc., etc. And so I've been teaching a bit on this idea of diversity of AI. Of course, the solution to the big data problem, if we take this one in particular, there's applying the law is possible. You can do, and there's plenty that are doing new retribution and attribution mechanism. You can also use, diffusion models that are clean, or models that are clean, trained on public data or Creative Commons data. There's enough data, in fact, out there. But I'm pushing the mostly unknown from the general audience and from the artistic audience, small data and model crafting approach. Because, of course, we teach, like a lot of other people intervening in this symposium, we teach Max and Python and Comfy UI, and we develop our own objects, and we have university level offerings. We're actually reopening now our AI courses to people that are non-SFU students, because a lot of those courses didn't exist when people were students. So we think that there's really a time where upskilling and integration of past, future, and current students need to happen. But we're also trying to address what I hear artists, in the sense of fine arts, do want. And artists want to navigate models, adapt to model, but they want to potentially craft their own model. They don't have big data. They don't want to use no cloud. They would not upload their data. Here in Canada, we work with indigenous communities, for example. They would not upload the data on anyone's cloud. They don't want to learn Python because they're doing sculpture and painting. And they want eventually a system that allows for direct manipulation of all the parameters to have control. They want it to be real time, potentially free and open source. And if you look for such a system, it just doesn't exist. There's Comfy and a number of things that you can do locally, but it takes quite a bit of technical skills. So we made one, and it's called Autolume, and it does indeed allow for small data and model crafting. And I won't present it today, but it has all of the skill that is required, and anyone 12 years old and more can be trained to train their own model on their own data. And we found that it has tremendous pedagogic value, because if you bring your data and use your data or select data, then you have to ask yourself questions around the data, and then if you train a model, you have to answer questions around the model and how to exploit it. And then on the legal side, the derivative of an artwork is an artwork. And so you get to solve the problem of who made that artwork and the problem of authorship that I was describing earlier. So we've been working, as we develop the tool ourselves, with artists, with those tools, and we discovered along the way, of course, that it has its own advantages, and it allows to do all sorts of things, and that we are often sold that in the big data world, the models that are out there can do anything and everything. And this is just not true. This is just a lie. Because if, for example, here we have Arabic calligraphy, you ask a big data model, the best you know, to do Arabic calligraphy, is going to hallucinate Arabic characters. And that's for two reasons. Arabic calligraphy, a massive art field with a strong contemporary practice, is still in the long tail of the data distribution, because it's not Hollywood and it's not Western. And then even in the data that are there, there's already bias, because, of course, the painters from the 19th century, Hollywood in Indiana Jones, the Arabic calligraphy in every painting and Western movies are misqualified, misrepresented, and that's not new. That was identified in the 70s as Orientalism is the name of that bias put forward by Edward Said. And so, in other words, what I'm saying here is that this is not just an alternative to big data. This is the fact that if you want to generate Arabic calligraphy, then you have to literally train your own model. And if you're not a computer scientist, then at the moment, you just have no way to do it if you don't want to give your data to the cloud. And so with Autolume, we alleviate those. Because it's real time, you can integrate it to performances, interactive installations, play with it on stage. So we've been teaching, and we find that there's quite a bit of demand, both in the Western world, but also increasingly as the tool gets known in places where they feel that their culture, their content is just not represented by big data. And so they actually have less of a want and more of a need to train models with the type of content that interests them. So we'll be doing that in Pakistan, in Thailand, and other places we have planned so far. And so with that, I just wanted to advocate today quickly. I'm wrapping up here for small data and model crafting, because it does alleviate some of the polarization around big data. It can turn people around literally in terms of attitude towards generative AI, and counter the dominant discourse pushed by mostly corporate agents. It also revealed everything around model bias, solve problems around authenticity and authorship, and allows to access very specific aesthetics that are hard to access otherwise because they're less dominant. And then, of course, small data is also a bit less costly in terms of environment. And so I'm still staying positive, thinking of those tools in the anthropocentric instrumentalist tradition that we need to be in accord with the tools and decide what tools we want to use. If we don't want tools to be imposed upon us, that techno-diversity is also important. But in this time of rise of creative and generative AI, there's ways to harness the power of machine and expand support our creativity. And so with that, I'm going to conclude here, thanking the funding bodies that make this work possible here in Vancouver, Canada, and pass it on, Matt.